Hi, Hoover biologists. So this video will be going in connection with your topic 1.6 notes on cell specialization and stem cells. Let me get my face out of the way here a little bit. All right. So we have this ability for the cells in our body to specialize or take on a special task that only they can do. And so, first, let's figure out how we could even get to that point. Well, we get to the differentiated cells or specialized cells through the use of stem cells. So, a stem cell is a cell that can become any type of cell. So we see here this diagram where we're starting with a single stem cell, and those could just simply replicate themselves and form new stem cells, or they can differentiate. They can become different. They can go from a stem cell to a skin cell. They can go from a stem cell and differentiate to become a neuron or fat tissue or red blood cells. So, this concept of being able to go from a single stem cell to any different cell in the body, we call body cells somatic cells. And then these somatic cells that have their own special job, they are then going to be limited to what they can become. So, for example, these red blood cells, when they divide, they don't have that special kind of superhero amazingness that stem cells have. When they divide, they can only become red blood cells. When fat tissue divides, it's only going to be able to become fat tissue. So this concept of cell specialization, let's kind of walk through what happens. Okay, so we have this single stem cell, and it's going to undergo a process called mitosis, which is just asexual cell division, where the parent cell is going to become two identical daughter cells with the exact same DNA as that original cell. So one set of DNA, but now we've got two copies, one in each of these new daughter cells. Okay, so now how do we go from two stem cells to one stem cell becoming and specializing to become a neuron, and one is going to specialize and differentiate and become an epithelial or a skin cell? Well, inside the nucleus of these stem cells, you have your entire copy of your DNA, but we're only going to, in a stem cell that's going to differentiate into a new cell, only one part of that DNA is going to be expressed, and all of the other parts of the DNA are not going to be expressed. So, in terms of this neuron, we're not going to have any genes for making bone cells because we're trying to express the genes that are going to be needed in the neuron. Now, this neuron is going to have the full set of DNA as well, but it's not going to express anything but the neuron genes. Same with these epithelial cells. Okay, they're only going to express the genes that will allow them to become an epithelial or skin cell. So let's help our notes get filled in then. So, what is this concept then of cell specialization? Going from a stem cell and then those specializing and becoming two totally different types of body or somatic cells. Well, different parts of DNA turned on or off, and that then becomes permanent, right? This will now permanently be a neuron based on the genes that are expressed. Okay, cells, because of this cell specialization, they're going to become different shapes. And we're going to learn that shapes allow the cells to do different jobs. Neurons have really, really important things called dendrites that are going to, and axons that are going to spread off of the neuron to allow it to send communication signals more easily. Epithelial cells, they're going to be shaped in a way that they can stack on top of each other and form a more protective barrier. So their shape really determines the job they can do or the function that they have. So you don't have to take any notes on these, but here's just a couple of examples of specialized cells, right? We have red blood cells that have a very special rounded shape that allows them to have a very specific function of carrying oxygen all around the body in our blood vessels. They need to be round because we can't have traffic jams of our red blood cells. They need to be able to move and groove through our arteries. Or fat cells. Let's talk about the shapes of fat cells. They have this big internal storage space called a vacuole. And if that vacuole is not filled up with fat, it's going to just be a shrunken, shriveled up fat cell. And so you're not going to see that fat on the body. We see muscle cells that have a very specific long shape to them to allow for contraction and to allow for movement. And then we have nerve cells here that have these long, thin projections that allow them to communicate with lots of other neighboring neurons more easily because they have all these branches to connect and talk to each other. So let's return though to your notes and let's get some of the really, really important specialized cells in the body that originally came from stem cells that differentiated and became muscle cells, fat cells, epithelial cells, the whole gamut. So let me get my face out of the way. What is the function of muscle cells? It's movement, being able to move your skeleton around. And so the shape of them, they're going to be long and skinny, and they're going to be able to be pulled and elongated, right? You wouldn't want to have really fragile and non-stretchable muscle cells, or you're going to have a lot of muscle pulls frequently. Then we have nerve cells. What's their function or job? Communication. They're going to be sending and receiving messages all through the body, right? You're going to need to send, at times a signal from all the way up here to all the way down to the bottom of your foot, right? So because of that, we need a function that we need a shape that facilitates that function. So the shape of nerve cells, they're long and they have lots of branches. Red blood cells, like I mentioned, their function is to transport oxygen all around the body in a series of arteries and blood vessels. So they need to be round. They need to have this dimple concave component here, and they need to be very flexible. Like I said, they need to be able to tumble over each other, move past each other, squeeze around, because we can't have traffic jams in our blood vessels. We need to move that blood around the system, specifically the circulatory system. Okay, let's take a look at bone cells. What's their function? Well, to support and protect our internal organs and also allow for height development in humans. And so the shape of them is really important. They have to be round and they cannot be tightly packed. You can't jam a ton of bone cells into a space because then there would be no way for you to be able to, one, take impact, right? Like jump, because all of your bones wouldn't be able to have like any shock absorption. So there's a whole bunch of spongy material inside of bone cells. But then the other part is they have to be light and airy because if they were jammed in with bone cells, they'd be so heavy we wouldn't be able to lift our skeleton. All right, let's take a look at skin or epithelial cells. Their function is protection from the outside. The largest organ on your body is your skin, and it is really, really important from protecting things from getting inside that should not be getting inside of our internal system. And so their shape is really important. They're going to be flat. They are usually kind of misshapen. They're irregular, if you will. And then they overlap on each other. They stack kind of like a shield. And then we have fat cells, and this will be our last type of specialized cell we're going to be introduced to here. What's the function of a fat cell? Its whole job is to insulate or keep warm, and also to protect or provide cushion for our body and our bones. Like if you think about it, if your butt didn't have any fat cells or what we would call adipose tissue, right? That's the tissue made from fat cells. Then every single time you sat down too hard, your seat bone, right? Your butt bone would take a huge impact and it'd be extremely painful, and you might cause long-term damage if you keep sitting too hard. So you have this protective barrier on your rear end to help protect the bones in that region of your body. The shape of fat cells is really, really important to their function. They are round, they're tightly packed close together, and they have big empty spaces inside of them. And those empty spaces will stay empty unless they become filled with fat. And that's one interesting thing about fat cells, is that once you have intaken too many calories so that your body is not able to burn it off fast enough. Instead, it converts it and turns it into long-term fat storage. Those fat cells, they will never go away. So even if you try to lose the weight, fat cells will shrink, right? And that empty space inside will not contain fat, but the fat cell will always be there. And that's why when people have gained weight, it's very easy to put the weight back on, because the fat cells were just shrunken, right? And they're just waiting to be filled again with fat. All right. So if you were to take one major thing away from this video, it's that each somatic or body cell has a very specific shape, and that shape helps contribute to its function or the job that it can do.